Okay, so first we have to excuse me. I might be sneezing a bit. I've got a critical dose of hay fever about 5 hours ago, so I have a box of tissues here ready. So forgive that. Now, before we begin, I have a little bit of explaining to do what's going on, what's going to go on here with the next 4 chapters, because we're beginning part 3, which is about Sankhya. So Sankhya is the analytical study of the world, the senses, the mind, the false ego, and the intelligence, and their interaction. Yep. And what I've done previously, I've studied 4 chapters in this section of 5, and I put it into what I see as a separate presentation, apart from the reading of the whole book. So the slides we're going to see here is as if it's a separate presentation. You understand? So like I was going to do a seminar on making friends with the mind, and I took the materials from these 4 chapters here, some from Sankalpa Kaumudi. So you're going to see not the same slides as you did before. So but what I thought I would do is I won't give I won't do it as like a Shuddha Bhakti Chintamani, like I'm giving a presentation in the class, because I think our reading is going really nicely, and I didn't want to omit anything in these chapters, being as we're reading through it, because the way I've done the presentation, I've kind of summarized the points. You understand? You follow? Because I can't, if you're given a seminar, it's not possible to cover every sentence in the chapters. So we're going to read through it as we usually do, but I've got slides here with some notes, so I'll be perhaps sharing some notes, and these slides might make it a bit more interesting for you as well. Try to, they're a bit like this, Well, so
with Shuddha Bhakti Chintamani, you picked bits and pieces.
Yeah,
whereas here we're reading the whole book.
Yeah.
So it's a bit, yes.
So I thought I would stick to that.
Yes, it's much.
Yeah. I would stick to that. I've got a few people in the waiting room. Okay, wow. There's a few people out there waiting.
Let them in, let them in.
Okay, so now I've just made that big announcement. I'll probably have to make it again quickly. Let's get everyone coming. I should have waited.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna, welcome everyone. Sorry for leaving you outside the door.
I hope you've got some nice tea and biscuits ready for us all.
I've got some tea ready for me. Yeah.
What's the point? You're supposed to be a good host.
I'll do it online. So for those who just joined, I'll just quickly explain. The slides will be a bit different what you're looking at, because I've made a separate study of the next 4 chapters into a seminar. So I'm using those slides. Okay, but we are going to read through it as per normal, as we usually do. But there'll be different types of slides to look at. Perhaps a bit more interesting, a few more pictures. All right. So wow, there's lots of people coming. Hare Krishna. It's wonderful. We have 13 devotees with us. Thank you, everyone. So let's begin, shall we? Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vastaya Putale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachaline Nivasisha Sunyavadi Pashtakara Satarine. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhaktivinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. Okay, so for those, some news flash. Copies of this Sankalpa Kaumudi is available in our shop now, in our temple. If you want to purchase a copy, then you can. It's available there. And also Brihat Bhagavatamrita is available as well. So anyone wanting to buy the hard copy of Brihat Bhagavatamrita, or Sankalpa Kaumudi, it's in our shop now. Okay. All right.
My job of advertising.
Sorry?
I was about to let you know it's there.
Okay, yeah, guys, she's involved with the shop. Yeah. So first come, first serve. All right. Whoever gets there first can have a copy.
These slides look very painful for my head.
The what?
The slides look really painful.
That's all right. Now, this chapter is quite technical, Sankhya, but Maharaj, or these chapters coming up, is a little bit technical, but Maharaj has nicely broken them down into different sections.
Hello.
Hello. And then he goes over to make sure we understand. Hare Krishna. All right, let's start reading, shall we? Anupama, I can see your hand up there. So you can begin reading. We're on beginning page 165. Chapter 10. Part 3. Are you with us, Mother Anupama? Perhaps you're muted, so we can't hear you. Perhaps she's not. Perhaps she's a bit busy at the moment. Sahachari Mother, you can begin reading now. Well,
Okay, thank you. The agents of Sankalpa. In the first two parts of this book, we introduced and defined sadhana bhakti, the ultimate science of perfection. The definition of sadhana established its purpose as bhava, ecstatic love. With that clear objective in mind and with the spiritual rewards that objective holds, sadhakas can move forward from their current level of advancement with enthusiasm. The many steps towards bhava are known as sankalpas or determinations, and many steps there will be. After all, it is rare that success can be accomplished in one giant step, such as a single sankalpa from bhajana kriya to bhava. It is true that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu immediately exhibited ecstatic symptoms upon taking initiation, but he was the Supreme Lord, and we generally see that even great devotees require many steps and many years to attain or to disclose their perfection. It is therefore not unreasonable to assert that the journey to Krishna is not an overnight affair. In their Dwaraka pastimes, Srimati Radharani solicits from Krishna a blessing that his determined practitioners will one day see him face to face. In so doing, she admits that such attainment will take a long time and that those desirous of it must sustain a steady heart. Chirat asamatram tvayi virachayanta sthiro dhiyo vidhayayuryu vamsam madhurima ghabire madhu pure dadana kaishore vayasi sakitham gokula pate prapadayeta stesam parichayam avasyam nayano. Still, please grant this one benediction to those devotees who reside in the profoundly sweet land of Vrindavan, and who for a long time earn with a steady heart to someday attain you. Please, O Master of Gokula, appear before their eyes as their youthful friend. To realize this blessing that Radha secured will take time and repeated initiatives on the part of the resolute sadhaka. Each step will require a clear vision of both its goal and its means. A sankalpa is successful when a devotee's means and goal are well defined, and when he preserves not only with the challenges he faces, but with the many steps he must take. The obvious vehicle for a sankalpa is the material body and its powerful senses. It was with the material body that one became entangled, and with that same material body, one can make his spiritual life successful. It is just a matter of how the body is employed. With our ears, we hear Krishna's holy names. With our eyes, we see the deity of the Lord. And with our hands, we serve the Vaishnavas. Devotees may take a lesson from Maharaj Ambarish on how to fully and systematically engage their senses on their journey to Krishna. Sukadeva Goswami describes the king's glories in this way. Maharaj Ambarish always engaged his mind in meditating upon the lotus feet of Krishna. His words in describing the glories of the Lord, his hands in cleaning the Lord's temple, and his ears in hearing the words spoken by Krishna or about Krishna. He engaged his eyes in seeing the deity of Krishna, Krishna's temples, and Krishna's places like Mathura and Vrindavan. He engaged his sense of touch in touching the bodies of the Lord's devotees. He engaged his sense of smell in smelling the fragrance of tulsi offered to the Lord, and he engaged his tongue in tasting the Lord Prasad. He engaged his legs in walking to the holy places and temples of the Lord, his head in bowing down before the Lord, and all his desires in serving the Lord. 24 hours a day. Indeed, Maharaj Ambarish never desired anything for his own sense gratification. He engaged all his senses in devotional service in various engagements related to the Lord. This is the way to increase attachment for the Lord and be completely free from all material desires. But the senses are not independent agents. They are directed by a common master known as the mind, which is also part of the body, a subtle part. And it is the mind that poses the greatest challenge to the spiritual aspirant. It poses a challenge because, for the conditioned soul, the mind can be the aspirant's greatest enemy. The Lord discloses this spiritual challenge to Arjuna. One must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. Reading the above verse, one will be prompted to ask, how can the mind be an enemy? It can be an enemy when it directs the sense to sense gratification or when it meditates on sense gratification. Both these actions are obstacles to spiritual growth, and the devotee who entertains them while doing sadhana is on the slow boat to bhava. Inattention on the path of progress leads to frustration, and if not corrected, a likely failure. To make determination successful, the mind has to be sympathetic to properly scheduled spiritual pursuits. And for the mind to be on its own best behavior, it must be controlled. This will ensure that both it and its subordinates, the senses, are cooperating with the efforts of the sincere practitioner. Krishna re-emphasizes the dual nature of the mind while providing the toggles switch that transforms the mind's inimical conduct to a friendly one. That toggle is the ability to control or conquer the mind. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy.
Okay, perhaps we'll just pause there. I was saying pause before, but I had my mute on. I didn't really. So we're kind of, this is just, hopefully following the kind of introduction that Maharaj is given. Yes, Krishna consciousness can be achieved by engaging our senses in the service of the Lord, and he quotes Maharaj Ambarish, Savai Mana Krishna Pada Vindayo. But it's seen, and why this way Maharaj, and it's written in Bhagavatam as well about Sankhya. And Maharaj is highlighting this. But our senses and our mind is perhaps the shared problem for most sadhakas. Yeah. The uncontrolled mind and the wayward senses. This is a challenge for all of us in trying to achieve what this book is basically about, is trying to transform our sadhana into bhava. And Maharaj also introduces the subject of Sankalpa here, because the whole book is called Sankalpa Kaumudi. So now for the first time, he's introducing that term with some explanations. So Sankalpas is absolutely needed. So Sankalpa means a determination, and it's needed to go through the different stages of devotion, different determinations that we make. But unless our mind and senses are under control, it'd be very difficult to make these sankalpas and to execute devotional service according to the determinations that we make. That's basically what Marge is introducing the subject. Any reflections on this, or comments or questions? Forgive the pictures.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, how do we know if our mind's controlled? Because our mind can be very tricky, and you can, like, it can cheat you, and you can think, yeah, my senses are under control, but you know, because obviously we have to eat, and if we, you know, for me, I might make some cookies and eat like 6 of them with some hot milk, but I don't think that's out of control, is it?
Yeah, very good point. Well, it's probably safe place to start is perhaps we should start with the assumption that our mind is not absolutely controlled. You know,
Yeah.
we are sadhakas, so therefore we are kind of at odds with our mind sometimes, or some all the time, and perhaps some devotees sometimes. So it is an obstacle for us in general. But you gave the example, for instance, having said that, the example of eating 6 biscuits instead of 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, you know, generally, like, there's a picture coming up here. I think we're showing it a bit later. Or this next picture here. Yeah. Basically, the less we're determined in Krishna consciousness, the less we're determined, or the less determination we have during our japa, you know, and the more lax we are, and the less chaste we are in what we're watching and what we're listening to, be it on the internet or be whatever it is, the more we're inclined to perhaps speak Prajalpa, more, or the more we're inclined to criticize devotees. Then this is all symptoms of a uncontrolled mind. You know? So if we are complete, actually to be in complete control of our mind is probably not something that we probably haven't fully experienced. You know, we probably have experienced it to like one degree or another, and we are on the path of realming in the mind to actually make it our best friend. But generally, we're throughout one day, we're dealing with the minds going here, going there. I mean, even perhaps your question in essence, Mavalabang, you can probably have a good estimation on how you're doing is when you, in the aspect of controlling the mind, is when we sit down to chant japa. And even more so when we sit down to chant the Gayatri mantra, which is a mantra that we chant within the mind. And that will give us a good picture of where we stand, you know, where we stand, especially, I'd say especially, but japa, and especially like Gayatri, or when we're doing service, or when we're reading, how much can we absorb ourselves in what we're reading without our mind going here and going there, you know? And it's not just a problem for us, it's a problem for all students who want to study, you know, everyone at work who's trying to get a project done, and they get distracted, you know. Yeah, students want to study, you know, they're just supposed to be writing an essay, then they throw out on the YouTube for 2 hours instead of doing their studies, you know, because the mind, you know, the mind is uncontrolled. So perhaps, I don't know if that helps to answer the question, Marvel, you have to kind of do a self-assessment.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
You have to do like kind of self-assessment.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Yes, Nima.
Yeah, Prabhu, just adding to what Lobanga said, I was just thinking, it is good to have those biscuits rather not having and thinking, oh, I would have had it.
Yeah, that's another aspect of controlling the mind, is that sometimes we have, well, that will be described in detail. But for instance, there is one aspect of controlling the mind. So according to the circumstance and the time, we may have to employ different things or different what's the word? Different tricks. In other words, the mind is like a young child.
Yeah, because you
So,
give something
yeah. So
like a young boy.
so,
Yeah.
so to stop the young child crying, you
Hmm.
may give it, you may give the child some license to have 2 lollipops instead of 1
Hmm.
in the mind.
Hmm.
So, it's like that. Prabhupada said sense gratification is like salt. It should be just enough.
Hmm.
It shouldn't be too much and too little. Often
Hmm.
that's a problem when devotees first in the very beginning stages try to absolutely control their mind
Then
without giving any
it becomes.
leeway and become very strict with themselves.
Hmm.
Because they're not so advanced, often they can become quite envious of those who are, who are eating prashadam to their satisfaction. But yeah, no, that's right. So we have to judge. That might be one of the ways to deal with the mind, but we have to be very careful because how much we indulge it. You give an inch and it'll take a mile. So we have to be careful.
Yeah, maybe you take and then you think, okay, today I'm taking this more. Maybe I will try tomorrow without having 6. I will take 4 and see whether I can survive with that 4.
Now, what's interesting in this chapters that we're studying is Maharaj really analyzes what's going on when the mind is thinking of enjoying a particular object of the senses and why it's thinking like that. And that we'll get into. So just hold on there on that particular point of discussion.
Okay.
Maharaj we'll open it up that more. We'll open up this more. But yeah.
I'll just say, one of the Prabhupada disciples, Rohini Nandan?
Yeah.
When we first started, he said that, when you're chanting and your mind's like, oh, what shall I cook? What shall I eat whole day? What shall I do this? So he said, like, okay, you speak to the mind and say, okay, let's just chant now. And then I'll give you time to think about this later on.
Yeah.
And I kind of say to myself, okay, when I'm in the shower, we'll think about what we're going to cook or something like that, So
Yeah.
let's now.
So there's different ways, like as sadhakas, that we learn to trick or to cajole the mind, trick the mind, or to pacify the mind. But whatever we're doing, we are at odds with the mind, and we have to do, if our mind was really controlled, then we wouldn't have to cajole the mind, to trick the mind, because it would be our absolute best friend, and it will never betray us. But at the moment it's betraying us a lot. So therefore we have to trick it. We have to cajole it. We have to do all types of things. We have to tell lies to it. Because at the moment it's kind of, to one degree or another, it's as though we're not doing so bad. At least we've come to Krishna consciousness and we've taken up the principles and we're following spiritual principles in life. So we're doing very good actually. But there's a ways to go, and the more we learn about the mind and the senses, it's part of Sambandha Gyan, then the more potent and the more effective our spiritual duties or our spiritual activities will be. For Ekaha Kurunandana. But yeah, so this will be an interesting read, these chapters. It's all about the mind, the senses, and the false ego, and how they interact. But yeah, thank you for that very question. Anybody else? Any questions or comments? Otherwise, we read a bit more. There's a few hands up, so perhaps we'll share out the reading a bit. Anupama, are you there with us this time? No, something must have perhaps a Jehovah's Witness has come to the door. And she's speaking with her. In fact, 3 persons raised their hand. Okay, Chandravalima, would you like to read on?
Okay. Where were we?
Yeah, where were we? Oh yeah, page
Okay.
168. But conquering the mind is a science.
Yeah. But conquering the mind is a science. It is an undertaking that is made possible by empowering another controlling agent, the intelligence. Such success in determination is conditional on a purified intelligence gaining the upper hand over the mind. Krishna makes this necessity clear in no uncertain terms. A transcendentalist who does not completely control his words and mind by superior intelligence will find that his spiritual vows, austerity, charity flow away just as water flows out of an unbaked clay pot. By contrast, when the intelligence is empowered by the practice of pure devotion, it becomes successful in guiding a sadhaka towards his desired destination. The Lord reassures us with the following words. Being surrendered to me, one should control the speech, mind, and life air, and then through loving devotional intelligence, one will completely fulfill the mission of life. The next few chapters are dedicated to understanding how the bewildered and forgetful intelligence can be rectified in order to win control over the unruly mind. A part of this assessment is to recognize another agent in the hierarchy of control over the senses, and that is the false ego. The challenge of the sadhaka includes converting the false ego to its original identity as Krishna's servant. It is only with the self-conception of I am Krishna's servant that devotees can hope to attain love. It is selfless service alone that gives devotees entrance into the domain of love. To expose the falsity of bodily identification, Krishna explains the different forms in which the false ego manifests and how by devotional service false ego is rectified. Although the false ego has no factual basis, it is perceived in many forms as the functions of the mind. Speech, life, air, and bodily faculties. But with the sword of transcendental knowledge, sharpened by worship of a bona fide spiritual master, a sober sage will cut off this false identification and live in this world free from all material attachment. The interaction of the above-mentioned agent and how they are made favorable to devotional service is a matter of relationship, sambandha. And if the senses, mind, and intelligence sound like a crowded playing field, they are not the only contestants involved. Within the body is also the contaminated consciousness, as well as the living entity, the soul, while outside the body are the modes of material nature and the age and agents of Kali. How do all these factors interact and how do they influence a sankalpa, favorably or otherwise? How are these agents made favorable for a sankalpa? And how are they all, including the mind, brought in line with the sadhaka's aspiration? The knowledge with which one can answer these questions is called sambandha gyan. And part 3 of Sankalpa Kaumudi dives deeply into the nectar ocean of this foundational knowledge.
Perhaps we'll pause there. Okay, any reflections or it's important that we kind of we're all on board of how this is progressing, because if we get lost at some point, then it's really difficult to relate. So Marge again is more introducing the subject that that is coming.
I was thinking that, you know, Maharaj is saying, like the senses, mind, intelligence, or it's just overcrowding, like a lot's going on in your body, really, in your mind, you know?
Yeah, we're in a subtle body.
Yeah, in the subtle body, lots going on. And external, you also got the modes of material nature and all the things that thrown at you by
Yeah,
the
so that,
world, you know?
yeah,
So there's a lot that a sadhaka has to deal with, you know?
yeah, that's exactly the point. So that's what we're dealing with on a daily basis. You know, there's the influence of the modes of material nature, there's our conditioning,
Yeah.
then there's our habituated, uncontrolled mind, and then there's something called the false ego, which sometimes is difficult to understand, but false ego in essence means misidentification. So it plays a big role in our illusion, because we very much identify it with the impressions in the mind. Yeah, and we identify with the kind of desires of the mind.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Yes.
I was reading this Srimad Bhagavatam. Sharp transcendental knowledge sharpened by worship of a bona fide spiritual master, sober sage will cut off this false identification and live in this world free from all material attachment. I not 100% to that, but when I read that and when I was listening to what you were saying, I have a very little experience of this, what is mentioned there. I thought I would share it. Is that okay?
Yes, please. Sorry, I was on mute there. Just
Yeah.
blowing my nose.
Thinking once I asked one question from my spiritual master, the email. So for somehow when he wrote to me, I really didn't understand fully. So I thought he didn't understand my question. So I asked again. Then he wrote, got more confused. So what happened? But then I was thinking, oh, what is this now? I'm just wondering. I'm waiting. About 5 months down the line, it was very clear to me because I started really praying. What is this now? I don't understand this. And I feel ashamed to ask again because the more I ask, more I'm getting confused. So I felt that, sometimes it takes a while for our false ego to get really cleansed up, you know.
Yes, sorry, I was a bit distracted then. Vamsi was trying to get in and he's got the wrong Zoom. But anyway, I was listening. Yeah. In fact,
I felt the 5 months down the line, it was very clear to me what he said to me the first time, which was not at all clear to me at that time. And then I asked a question, I got more confused with his email. And I thought, oh, what is this now? Maybe somebody else is writing, in the sense because Maharaj will dictate, somebody else must be making a mistake of writing. I was thinking all that. But it became very clear about 6 months down the line.
Yeah, that often happens. Spiritual concepts or directions that are given to us,
Yeah.
We might not immediately be able to relate or understand.
Yeah.
At least we have faith and we meditate upon the instruction.
Yeah.
And we continue rendering service. And that's why spiritual life is often quite mystical, because then things we found confusing 5 years ago all of a sudden become clear in a matter of a few seconds of inspiration.
Yeah. So I was
Basically, that's that's all down to Krishna's grace and mercy.
Hmm.
Yeah, when he sees our sincere effort to try to understand and apply what we're hearing, then things become more crystallized at some point, if it's not immediately understood. But yeah, so thank you for sharing that. And Mother Anupama, there's a lot going on here at the moment on the thing. Anupama, she's here, but she can't unmute herself. So I have to do that. But we'll call her, let's see if I can do that. Yeah, I can do that here. I can ask her to read when we start again. Yeah, so thank you for that. Any other comments on this? I'm flicking back and over the pages, so I get a bit lost where we left off. Where did we leave off? We left off reading at?
Should we have made the attempt?
Oh, which page is that?
170.
Oh yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So perhaps yeah. So let's just read on. Let's see if I can unmute Anupama. No, I can only. No, it seems like I can't. I'm trying to. Excuse me. All right, perhaps Kunamai, you can read for us on page 170.
Okay. We have made the attempt and taken the liberty of presenting this analytical study with conviction that understanding the mechanics of how the mind, intelligence, senses, and ego participate in making a determination towards advanced devotion is helpful in grasping the theme of this book. While these chapters may be technical, we recommend that readers not skip over them, which readers sometimes do, simply because they may pose a challenge. What follows is a part of a Sankhya philosophy that Srimad Bhagavatam so eruditely presents, and its reading is a kind of intellectual exercise. Kaviraj Goswami supports a sincere student should not neglect the discussion of such conclusions, considering them controversial. For such discussions strengthen the mind. Thus, one's mind becomes attached to Sri Krishna. While it is true to say that this entire book is of the nature of an analytical study, Sankhya, the chapters comprising this part of the book fall even more so in that category. What is Sankhya? From the perspective of Srimad Bhagavatam, the study of elemental categories of material world is known as Sankhya, and applying that study to attain liberation is celebrated as Sankhya Yoga. This type of categorical analysis of Sankhya is what Western scholars refer to as metaphysics, and which Encyclopedia Britannica defines as the philosophical study whose object is to determine the real nature of things, to determine the meaning, structure, and principles of whatever is insofar as it is. By comparison to its different from Atlantica, Sankhya is somewhat more detailed, and it literally means
There's a bit of noise in the background there, so we can't hear you reading.
Yeah.
Try now. Try
from
and
the
keep the
root
book still.
yeah, and the prefix sam, meaning to count. Sankhya counts the elements and minutely catalogues the cause and the effect principles underlining the unfolding of the material nature, from the microscope to the macroscopic. The whole purpose of such analysis is to distinguish matter from spirit, and having done so, to further understand the nature of conditioned souls. the dynamics of their bondage and their path to liberation through service to the one supreme soul. Sankhya is one of the elemental building blocks of Krishna consciousness that Srila Prabhupada introduced to his first students in 1966. Perhaps some of you, or most of you, know what is Sankhya Yoga, metaphysics, by Kapil. Sankhya Yoga means analytical study of these material elements. Now, what is the use of analytical study of this material world? Simply understanding that this material world is working in 24 elements. The 11 senses, the 10 senses, the 5 working senses, and 5 knowledge acquiring senses, and the mind, 11 elements. And Panchamahabhuta means the material elements, just like earth, water, fire, air, and ether. 11 and 5, it becomes 16. Then subtle elements, just like mana, buddhi, ankar, mind, intelligence, and force ego. Force ego, so 16 and 3, 19, and 5. I mean to say sense objects. Sense objects means rupa, form, rasa, taste, form, taste. Rupa, rasa, gandha, smell. So rupa, rasa, gandha, and then sabda, sound. You've got ear, you require sound to hear. In this way, the Sankhya Yoga, they have analyzed the whole material world into 24 elements. That is Sankhya Yoga.
So just pause there. We're probably, okay, so again, this is an introductory chapter, or introductory part to this chapter. And it's very important for us because we don't have a spontaneous attraction to Krishna. You could say we have a spontaneous attraction to the material energy. So our mind and intelligence is very much welded and created by the modes of material nature. So it's important for us sadhakas to have a good understanding of how this body works, how the mind works, and how the intelligence works, and the influence of the false ego. And this Sankhya, Bhagavad Gita, in the 5th chapter, I think, I forget the verse now, but it describes that the goal of Sankhya and Bhakti is the same. And in that sense, it's one and the same practice. Because by real study of theistic Sankhya, then one will come to the conclusion that we are the servants of Krishna, ultimately, that we are not this body, we're the servants of the Supreme Lord. Yeah. So, also often it can be known as Jnana Yoga as well, Sankhya. But the Sankhya that we are studying is in direct relationship with Krishna. So it's not of the atheist Sankhya. Just explain that was why Maharaj is encouraging us, although it may be quite detailed. It's good for us to spend a little bit of time to give this subject, or it's good to give this subject some time and some thought, because it will only help us in spiritual life. I mean, one time I was really struggling, and I was reading the 3rd canto, which is Lord Kapila, who teaches Sankhya. And I got a pen and a notebook, and I was really following it and trying to understand it and writing everything down. I've still got the book now, actually. It goes back about 17 years. And I was taking notes, and I felt so relatively free from my struggle afterwards, just by trying to delve down into the nature of the mind, the senses, and the intelligence. And it wasn't directly, this is not directly about This is not like Venu Gita. This is not Venu Gita or pastimes of Krishna. There is no Radha Tattva in here. Actually, it comes at the end. There's no pastimes of Radha, Krishna, and the gopis and things like that. You know, this is really relevant for us again who are not so spontaneously attracted. So let's give it a go and try to see how much we can understand. I mean, I read this a couple of times now, and I find it really fascinating. Any questions or comments on that? Otherwise, we can finish this chapter for sure. Once you'd like to join us. Anupama, sorry, mother, you can hear, but we can't hear you. I'm trying to unmute you, but I can't. So perhaps just we have to call it that this week, and next reading we can do, I'm sure. Hopefully it'll be solved. Yeah. All right. Let me just read, perhaps I can just read the end of this chapter, and then Suniti Priya, you can go into this next point.
Okay,
The next
thank
chapter,
you.
Taming the Mind. Let me just finish this chapter. Krishna also introduces his teachings in the Bhagavad Gita by analyzing the difference between the material body and the life force moving it. And then in latter chapters, he teaches how to apply Sankhya as a yoga process that ultimately leads to Bhakti Yoga. The Lord himself uses the word Sankhya in the following verse. Eshite Behite Shankhi Buddhi Yogam Pramam Shino Buddhi Yukto Yapada Kama Bandam Bahasyasi. Yeah, I think this is the what chapter is this? This is text 10. 10. Oh, it's 239. Okay. Thus far I have explained this knowledge to you through analytical study. Now listen as I explain it in terms of working without fruitive results. O son of Pritha, when you act in such knowledge, you can free yourself from the bondage of works. So that thus I describe this knowledge to you through analytical study. That's Krishna's instructions on Atma Tattva. Dehi no sminita dehi kamana yoganam taraha. All those verses where he's describing how not the body, how the body's it's just like changing a garment, the soul is eternal, etc. Then he begins to explain it how working without attachment. So he describes Sankhya. That's the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah. Furthermore, Srimad Bhagavatam repeatedly teaches primary and secondary phases of creation through the science of Sankhya. One such presentation is that of Lord Kapila, the Acharya of devotional Sankhya, who also elaborately describes the science of Sankhya Yoga as it relates to pure devotional service. And finally, even the biography of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, includes a review of cause and effect as relating to the creation. Hence, this kind of approach to devotional topics is one that studious devotees will be familiar with. The third part of Sankalpa Kaumudi, therefore, presents an overview of how the fundamental components of Sankalpa interact. It thereby lays the foundation for understanding the dynamics of Sankalpa, a foundation that will hopefully inspire sadhakas to boldly progress step by step to Bhava. Okay. Some of you might be ready with your notebooks if you want. Take notes if you like. You're welcome to. All right. Any comments or questions on that? Otherwise, we can go into chapter 11. Taming the mind. It's a good place to start. Yeah. My best friend. So you could read Suniti Priya.
The previous chapter explained the need of understanding and dynamic of Sankalpa is light of critical analysis of the decision-making process and the competent which facilitates decision. The first competent under review is a chapter in mind, that all-powerful open of spiritual progress. We begin our study of the mind by hearing about the secondary creation known as Visagara, and how the subtle and gross sense evolved by the mystic potency of the Supreme Lord. The unmanifested internal aggregative gate 24 material element in which the modes of material nature are equitable, and which is state of material nature proper to his manifesting.
Prior.
Right, yeah, right, thank you. And called Prabhana. The 24 element, as explained by the Lord Kapil, are as followed. The aggregate element, namely the 5 gross elements, the 5 subtle elements, the 4 internal sense, the 5 sense for gathering knowledge, and the 5 outward organs of action are known as the prahana. Of these 24 elements, the 4 internal sense are the mind, intelligence, force, ego, and contaminated consciousness. The later being as known as Mahatattva. It is interesting to know that the material elements are counted differently by the different sages in the different Vedic texts. The reason for such variance is given by Lord Krishna himself in Evidence 3. Lord Kapil explained that like our external sense, these 4 internal sense can only be distinguished from each other by their different functions. This is very important point for readers to consider and to remember in their battle with the unruled mind. The Lord explained in this way: the internal subtle sense are experienced as having 4 aspects in the shape of mind, intelligence, ego, and contaminated consciousness. Distinction between them can be made only by the different functions, since they represent different characteristics. For example, the 5 knowledge sense are the eyes, ears, tongue, nose, and skin, through which we see, hear, taste, smell, and touch, respectively, while these senses have general physical appearance by which they can be distinguished. Their primary distinctive characteristics are their functions such as seeing, hearing, and tasting. However, since these internal senses are not physically prescribable, they can be distinguished from each other by their functions, such as thinking, discerning, and perceiving, this being attributable to mind, intelligence, and force, ego, respectively.
Okay, perhaps we better
carry on.
And perhaps we'll pause there. And I think we'll probably have to do a few things, hopefully following what's being explained. Any questions or comments before I might?
I didn't catch the 5 working senses. It didn't say there.
You're saying it didn't say the 5 working senses? Sorry. So you can that question again, Mama? Sure.
I didn't quite catch on which ones are the 5 working senses.
Let's just read back. The 5 working senses. What are the 5 working senses? It's the
Is it touch, taste, hear?
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. think that's described at the end here. Hearing, seeing, hearing, and tasting, etc.
Thank you.
Anyway, perhaps it will be discussed as it comes up. But Marge is bringing out a point which is difficult perhaps to grasp. This point which he's highlighting here is that we have the internal, we have the, you know, the subtle body, we have the internal senses, and there's no specific distinction within the subtle body, but only when they interact with, let me read this, let me try. When they function by their different functions. Let me just read this verse again here. You said, the internal subtle senses are experienced having four aspects shaped in the shape of the mind, intelligence, ego, and contaminated consciousness. So distinctions between them can be made only by different functions, since they represent different characteristics. Let's read the whole thing again. For example, the five knowledge-acquiring senses are the eyes, ears, tongue, nose, and skin, through which we see, hear, taste, smell, and touch. While these senses have general physical appearances by which they can be distinguished, their primary distinctive characteristics are their functions of seeing, hearing, and tasting. However, since the internal senses are not physically perceivable, they can be distinguished from each other by their functions, such as thinking, discerning, and perceiving, these being attributed to the mind, intelligence, false ego, respectively. Anyone grasp that exactly? Marge is saying this is an important point to actually grasp.
Isn't this the working senses? Hear, taste, smell, touch, you know, tongue, nose, skin, isn't that, you know, touch?
Anyone can help us in this?
Yeah, because with the eyes you looking, so eyes are working, ears you hearing,
Yeah, the working senses, the knowledge acquiring senses.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just looked it up on Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, thank you.
It's Bhagavad Gita 13, verse 6 to 7. It says the five working senses are voice, legs, hands, anus, and genitals.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That was on my mind. I was going to say that, but I didn't. Yeah. There's the five working senses. Now they will be described. Marge is speaking about the knowledge acquiring senses, specifically here now.
I think
And
ear, skin, eye.
Yeah, and they can be distinguished by their manifestation of action. Anyway, Hare Krishna. Let's perhaps it's 58 minutes. Perhaps we can pause there for today. What I try and do, I mean, I didn't get time to read. I have read it, studied it, but I need to perhaps I need myself to refresh myself. So next week I'll try and be a bit more prepared and read through it first and see where it's going. Yeah. But to begin with, Marge is going to speak about the process of creation from subtle to gross as fundamental for understanding the nature of our mind, subtle and gross. Yeah. As it functions in similar ways. So that will be described. Yeah? All right. So hope this was excuse me. There's an introduction for these next. I hope this doesn't scare anyone away. I hope you can all join us next week. And let's together try and understand this as best as we can. Because if we can understand it, it's really going to help us in our spiritual life, you know, to really get an understanding of our mind and how it works and the intelligence and the false ego and the senses. You know, and try and make them our friend, you know, in executing Krishna consciousness. All right. So let's stop there on page. Where do we stop? We're on page 176.
7-6.
Okay. So next week we'll begin there. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining us, and look forward to tomorrow's hearing and chanting, which is continuing with Sudha Bhakti Taming, isn't it? Yeah, hearing the story of
Alex.
yeah. What was his what's his initiating name? Achyuta, is it?
Achyutananda.
Achyutananda. So let's read about Achyutananda tomorrow. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna.
Muli Prabhu ki
Hare
jai.
Krishna.
Thank you, everyone. All the
Hare
Namo Namo. Hare Krishna. Hare